Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. So if you are new here, my name's Claire, this is the Wanderlust Way. First off, let me say a massive thank you to everybody that supports this channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, becoming members, sending super thanks, sending gifts, sending donations. Honestly, you're the ones that are helping this channel to grow and I really do appreciate you. So today we're a long way from home. We're in London, we're in the capital of England, and we're going on a bit of a time travelling adventure through some of the darkest chapters of this city's history. Now, it's going to be full of ganglands, it's going to be full of murderers and smugglers and pirates, it's going to be all sorts of things like that that you could come to expect from a time travelling adventure. So if you're ready for that, that is enough waffle, let's wander. London, the capital of England and a city that boasts over 2,000 years of recorded history. A city founded by the Romans, scarred by plague, consumed by fire and battered by the Blitz. A city still standing, yes, but a city that carries its scars if you know where to look. The brochures of modern London may show you bright lights, famous landmarks and endless distractions. People come here from every corner of the world to watch a show, visit a museum or enjoy a meal, and then they head home believing they've seen it all. But they've only met its public face, because tucked away down narrow alleys and hidden behind centuries of history is another London entirely, one seen through the eyes of its oldest boozers. Whilst glasses have clinked and conversations have flowed, these old pubs have watched the city in silence. They've stood through so many moments of its history. They've welcomed writers and labourers, sailors and thieves, murderers and merchants. This is where some of the real history lives, where secrets were traded as freely as ale, deals were struck, revenge was promised, crimes were planned and things quietly unfolded, one conversation at a time. If the walls of some of London's oldest pubs could speak, I wonder what they'd say. Well, today, that's exactly what I hope to find out. Just what if it was possible to travel back in time to some of the darkest chapters in London's history? Well, today that's exactly what we're going to try and do. And we're going to use my time machine to do just that. But we're not just visiting any old places. We're going to some of the oldest pubs in London because they bear as silent witnesses to some of these events. So if you're ready for a wander like no other and you're brave, then let's go. We begin our journey today by stepping back not too far to the 1960s. Now, London is rebuilding after the Blitz. There's close-knit communities, cobbled streets, milk floats, smoke in the air. And the area that we're standing in today is classed as sort of Bethnal Green. It's London's East End. And this is gangland territory. Criminal gangs fought for power. And amongst all that were two very infamous twins who they went down in history, really. And the pub that we're going to go in behind us has a little bit of part of their story. So let's step inside and into the world of Ronnie and Reggie Kray. Ronald and Reginald were born on the 24th of October 1933, just 10 minutes apart, to Charles and Violet Kray in the heart of London's East End. At a time when infant mortality amongst Britain's working class remained tragically high, the birth and survival of healthy twins was unusual. Violet became something of a local celebrity in Bethnal Green, fiercely protective of the two boys who would one day become the most feared names in London's underworld. Nobody could have imagined, though, what lay ahead. The East End they were born into was tough. Poverty, overcrowding and violence were part of everyday life. Respect wasn't simply earned, it was taken. Street by street, reputation was everything, and fear could be worth more than money. By the 1960s, Ronnie and Reggie Kray had built an empire. They mixed with celebrities, politicians and boxing champions, all while controlling protection rackets, illegal gambling, armed robberies and violence across the East End. To some they were local heroes, to others they were ruthless criminals. Either way, nobody ignored the Krays. And this place at one time was part of that world. The Carpenters Arms. Bought in 1967 for their mother Violet, this wasn't simply the family local. Christmas parties were held here, friends and relatives drank, but behind the laughter and raised glasses, another world existed. Favours were called in, scores were settled, new alliances were forged. Men arrived to discuss business, never asking too many questions and never speaking louder than they needed to. In a city built on whispers, this was one of the places where those whispers carried the most weight.
Now in the Carpenters Arms, it's like they've got different rooms. So you come in the front and that's where the bar is. And then you come round through and then there's like this little snug area. So I'm imagining this is where all the business dealings would have happened. There's also, I've noticed there's like an exit door that they could quickly get out of. Maybe they could also let people in there. There could be a secret knock. There's double doors there as well. And then there's like a back as well, like a beer garden as well. So it's, tell you what, it does feel like, I can imagine it. You've got an overactive imagination and you could imagine being sat in here. I feel a bit nervous actually, sat in Ronnie and Reggie's territory.
I can't say for certain how much of the Carpenters Arms is exactly as Ronnie and Reggie would have known it, but the current owners have done a wonderful job of preserving its character. Around the walls are old photographs showing the pub as it once looked, while details like the stained glass and Tiffany-style lamps make it easy to imagine another era. Step outside though, and in many ways the East End tells a different story. Much of the world the Krays grew up in has disappeared. Their childhood home on Valence Road, just 100 yards from here, has long since been demolished and replaced. Streets have changed, buildings have come and gone, generations have moved on. But this pub remains. Standing quietly on Cheshire Street, it has outlived the empire that was built within its walls. And perhaps that's fitting. Because on the 29th of October 1967, Reggie Kray is said to have stopped here for a drink before leaving to murder Jack the Hat McVitie, a crime that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the Kray twins. Just over 30 years later, on the 11th of October 2000, Reggie Kray made one final journey along Cheshire Street. His funeral cortege passed the Carpenters Arms on its way through the East End, past the very pub that had witnessed both the rise of his empire and the beginning of its end. The Krays are long gone, but the stories remain. So for context, you've got the boxing club there, and then the Carpenters Arms is just there on the corner. You see it? That's where we've just come out of. So yeah, we are really in the heart of Kray gangland now.
We've now landed in the heart of Victorian London, in particular during a region of terror. Yes, the year is 1888 and a killer is on the streets of Whitechapel. Now, any of you that are already familiar with the Jack the Ripper killings may have noticed the pub behind me. It's known as the 10 Bells, and this has been formidable in the case because some say that two of his victims especially drank in this pub. I believe it was Annie Chapman and Mary Jane Kelly. Mary Jane Kelly was supposed to have been in this pub on the night of her murder, and her territory was the pavement just outside the street. So Let's go inside, have a little look and talk about what happened in the year 1888 just outside this pub.
It's 1888. Whitechapel and the neighbouring Spitalfields are among the poorest districts in Britain. And yet, despite the poverty, one thing is everywhere. Pubs, drinking dens, places where a cheap glass of gin or a pint of ale offered a brief escape from the hardships outside. Whitechapel alone was home to around 45 of these. On some streets, every other corner offered another drink, another conversation, and another chance to forget, if only for an hour, the desperate struggle of everyday life. One of those establishments was the 10 Bells. A public house had stood on this corner for well over a century. Its walls were already familiar with poverty, prostitution and violent crime, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared them for what was about to begin. The killings. Between August and November 1888, 5 women were brutally murdered on the streets surrounding this very pub. Most were living on the margins of society, forced into prostitution simply to survive. Their throats had been slit, their bodies horrifically mutilated, and in several cases organs had been removed with what appeared to be surgical precision. The newspapers went into overdrive. Rumours spread through every lodging house and every market, and every pub. Was the killer a doctor, a butcher? Had he learned anatomy? Or was something even more sinister at work? Perhaps the devil? Nobody knew, but everyone had a theory. The killer was never identified. Instead, he became known simply as Jack the Ripper. For the 10 Bells, nothing would ever be the same again. Mary Jane Kelly, the Ripper's final canonical victim, supposedly spent part of her last day drinking here with a friend before returning to the room where she would be found just hours later, horrifically mutilated. Her organs and body parts arranged around the room in what one officer described as a scene of unprecedented carnage. Annie Chapman, too, is believed to have visited the pub shortly before her own murder, although historians continue to debate that. As fear gripped Whitechapel, every stranger became a suspect. Women were terrified to walk the streets alone. Vigilance committees patrolled the neighbourhoods through the night, while inside pubs like these, whispers travelled faster than facts. Every customer had a theory. Every conversation searched for the same answer. Who was doing this? Who was Jack the Ripper? Was he drinking here? More than a century later, we're still asking the same questions. The mystery has inspired countless books, documentaries and films. You might even recognise the 10 Bells from the 2001 film From Hell. It starred Johnny Depp as Inspector Frederick Aberline. But although the real pub was used for research, and I believe Johnny Depp did drink in there, the interior scene on the screen was recreated in a film set. Today the streets outside have changed almost beyond recognition. But step through the doors of the 10 Bells and it's not difficult to imagine the fearful conversations that would have once filled this room. The pint glasses may have changed, but the mystery has never left.
It only feels right that before we leave Victorian London behind, we make one last stop. Now this is known as Mitre Square, and it was here on the 30th of September 1888 that the body of Catherine Eddowes was discovered, just behind me in fact, sort of roughly where that white line is on the floor. It looks very different to how it did back then, but this is the area. Now what was remarkable about that particular night, it was the night of 2 murders in fact, claimed to be done by Jack the Ripper, but there was a policeman who walked this route and he saw nothing. And then 15 minutes later, he discovered the body of Catherine. And it just goes to show that in the perhaps faster than we could even have a drink today, a life has been taken. And that doesn't quite sit right with me somehow. So I feel like this is a moment, a lot of us get lost in the thought of Jack the Ripper and the story behind it, the infamous murders, but it's also important to remember those victims too. And the only place I could really think of to come was Mitre Square, which is about 10-15 minutes walk away from the 10 bells. So yeah, let's not forget the victims too. Well, if you thought Victorian London was difficult and dangerous, then brace yourselves, because we're about to enter into a world of smugglers, pirates and dockside execution. And in this pub, I'm going to show you a little bit, and we're going to talk about a very, very famous pirate story.
We now find ourselves in 1701. The River Thames is London's beating heart. Every day hundreds of ships crowd its waters carrying spices, silk, tobacco, rum and riches from across the globe. But wherever great wealth gathers, so do those willing to steal it. Standing on the river's edge is the prospect of Whitby, a tavern whose history stretches back to 1520. Although fire destroyed much of the original building in the early 19th century, the ancient flagged stone floor beneath your feet has survived for around 5 centuries, worn smooth by generations of sailors, merchants, smugglers, and men with far darker reputations. Originally known as the Pelican, before later becoming the Devil's Tavern, this was no ordinary public house. Wapping was a rough dockside district where life revolved around the river. Sailors drank here, dock workers drank here. So too did smugglers, thieves and pirates, many fresh from voyages that had made them either rich or wanted. Just beyond the pub stood one of the most feared places on the Thames, Execution Dock. Unlike ordinary criminals, pirates convicted by the Admiralty weren't taken to Tyburn. They were brought here by boat and hanged beside the river as a warning to everyone who sailed these waters. Their punishment didn't end with death. Tradition dictated that the bodies were left hanging until 3 tides had washed over them. Twice each day the Thames rose around the corpse before retreating again, a grim reminder that piracy came at the ultimate price. Today a replica noose hangs outside the prospect of Whitby, marking the spot nearby where those final moments have become part of local folklore. Perhaps the most famous man to meet that fate was Captain William Kidd. Ironically, Kidd hadn't set sail as a pirate at all. In fact, he'd been commissioned by King William III to hunt them down. But after capturing a richly laden Armenian ship under disputed circumstances, he found himself accused of piracy instead. Abandoned by many of those who had once supported him, Kidd was brought back to London in chains. On the 23rd of May 1701, he was hanged at nearby Execution Dock. The first rope is said to have snapped, so they hanged him again. His body was then coated in tar and suspended in an iron gibbet beside the Thames for years, warning every passing sailor exactly what awaited those who turned pirate. Now stand here long enough and it's not difficult to imagine the creak of the gallows, the smell of the river, and the silence that must have fallen as another body was surrendered to the tide.
I love this. They've got like loads of little rooms, and apparently this snug that we're in at the minute, this is where Captain Kidd and various other pirates and smugglers and things like that would have had secret meetings and discuss things. And I can just imagine, like, I don't know, lots of smoke and glasses clean, and I'm getting a bit into this now. What about you, Aid? Do you feel
very unique,
do you feel piratey?
Very.
Yeah, I feel really piratey.
Favourite letter of the alphabet? You know what it was? R.
This room was once used for boxing matches. Perhaps some of the earliest international bouts took place here between seamen from all parts of the world. Cockfighting is also known to have taken place in this room.
Spend a few minutes inside the prospect, and it's hard not to feel as though you stepped into a time capsule. Every wall seems to have another story to tell. Old photographs, paintings, signs and maritime artefacts all compete for your attention. It's the sort of place where you can order a pint and completely forget to drink it because you're too busy reading. One room is dedicated to Samuel Pepys, who was said to be a regular visitor while serving as Clerk of the Acts for the Royal Navy before later becoming Secretary to the Admiralty. Now, if you've never heard of Pepys, he's best remembered for keeping one of the most famous diaries in British history. His journals captured everyday life in 17th century London with remarkable honesty, recording everything from the Great Plague and the Great Fire to life on the Thames. Without him, we'd know far less about the London of his day. Now, one small sign inside the pub also caught my eye. It read, "Numerous sightings of ghosts and apparitions here over the years, as well as tales of poltergeist experiences." Now, whether you believe in ghosts is entirely up to you, but considering the lives that have crossed this threshold over the last 5 centuries, it's hardly surprising that a few stories refuse to die. Sometimes it's said that history lives in the books, but standing in places like this, I can't help wondering if sometimes it chooses to stay exactly where it happened.
So just think, years ago you'd have been able to stand here and watch the executions. That's pretty grim. Oh yeah, we're just over the noose. Upon our trail, we find ourselves on Newgate Street. Now, there's a blue plaque, which is a site demolished 1777. So this was the site of the original Newgate prison. It was an infamous prison. There were lots of famous people held here, including Captain Kidd, who we mentioned earlier. This was the site. Now, used to originally take the prisoners from here to near the Marble Arch to Tyburn to be executed. But then they decided it was just easier to execute them on the streets out here. So the site that we're studying now, this would have been an area of execution. Now, if you turn just to the left, I'm going to show you around the corner, there is a pub there. Now, this is called the Magpie and Stump. I was hoping to take you inside. It's Sunday, it looks like it's closed. But this is the site that the criminals that were just due to be executed would have had their last drink. So, cameraman, if you wouldn't mind panning over, just to show everybody the Magpie and Stump. So that's the Magpie and Stump there. That's where they would have their last drink. They would be executed in this area on the streets. Now, the Viaduct Tavern, which is on the corner as well, again closed on Sundays. But this is an infamous pub, and sometimes people stop here if they're doing the trail, because there is a rumour that underneath this pub there are cells where some of the prisoners used to be held. It was part of the Newgate prison. However, some historians have debunked that myth and said they're not cells at all. They are in fact wine cellars. So if you know any more about that, then please feel free to let me know in the comments. But yeah, quite a grisly area, this place.
Newgate was one of Britain's most feared prisons. First established in the late 12th century and rebuilt several times over the years, it became synonymous with misery, disease and death. In 1836, Charles Dickens toured the prison and later described it as a house of death. In his Sketches by Boz, he painted a grim picture of overcrowded cells, condemned men awaiting execution, and neglected children living amongst the filth. The horrors of Newgate would later inspire some of the darkest scenes in his novels, including Oliver Twist, Barnaby Rudge and Great Expectations. Its cells held everyone from common thieves and highwaymen to debtors, murderers and notorious prisoners such as the writer Daniel Defoe, Oscar Wilde and of course Captain Kidd, who we met during our stop-off at the Prospect of Whitby. For many inmates, however, Newgate was little more than a waiting room. Just outside these walls, thousands gathered to watch public executions. They came from all over London to witness the condemned meet their fate. The final public execution at Newgate took place on the 26th of May, 1868, when Irish Fenian Michael Barrett was hanged for his part in the Clerkenwell bombing, which killed 12 people and injured many more. His execution marked the end of an era. It was the last public hanging ever carried out in Great Britain, and it happened right here outside Newgate Prison.
Our last stop is less about a pub and more about the area in which it stands. Now, all of the stops that we've made today, the pubs have all been silent witnesses to some of the darkest chapters of London's past, and the next one is no exception, because we stand now at Smithfield Market. It's a market today, but in the past it has been the site of many grisly executions and whatnot. So let me take you back.
One final push of a few buttons and we've travelled further back than anywhere else on today's journey. The year is 1305. We are standing in Smithfield. Today it's home to the UK's oldest and largest wholesale meat market. For more than 800 years, traders have gathered here before dawn to buy and sell meat. But the Smithfield we've arrived in bears little resemblance to the one we see today. Forget the magnificent Victorian market buildings and the cafes selling matcha. Forget the cars passing and the trendy diners heading out to try one of Gordon Ramsay's gourmet burgers. Because this is medieval London and we'll have none of that here. Here the air is thick with the smell of livestock. Butchers sharpen their knives while traders haggle over cattle, sheep and pigs. Yet on certain days, the biggest crowd isn't gathering to buy meat. They're here to watch someone die. For centuries, Smithfield became one of England's principal places of public execution. Hangings, burnings and brutal punishments were carried out in full view of the public. Justice wasn't hidden behind prison walls, it was performed before an audience. Perhaps no execution is more closely associated with Smithfield than that of the Scottish patriot William Wallace. On the 23rd of August 1305, after being convicted of high treason, Wallace was dragged through the streets of London behind a horse before arriving here to face the full punishment reserved for traitors. He was hanged, cut down while still alive, disembowelled, with his entrails burned before his eyes, before being beheaded. Then his body was cut into 4 pieces. His head was displayed on London Bridge, while his limbs were sent to towns across the kingdom as a warning to anyone who dared challenge the English crown. It's almost impossible to comprehend that level of brutality today, and yet all of this happened just a stone's throw from where we stand. And Wallace wasn't the last to suffer here. Over the centuries that followed, countless others met the same grim fate. Among them was Anne Askew, condemned for refusing to abandon her Protestant faith during the reign of Henry VIII. She'd been tortured so brutally on the rack at the Tower of London that she could no longer walk. She was carried to the stake in a chair and was burned alive here in 1546. But executions weren't the only spectacle. Pickpockets worked the crowds, muggers preyed on the unsuspecting visitors, and livestock changed hands almost daily. Fast forward back into the early 19th century, and here you could see wife selling, where husbands could barter away their spouse alongside their cattle. I guess no era is ever as perfect as we like to imagine. Every generation leaves behind stories we'd rather forget alongside those we're proud to remember. Perhaps that's why places like Smithfield and the old pubs we've visited throughout this journey matter so much. They've stood through plague, fire, war, crime and celebration. While generations have come and gone, they've simply remained, quietly watching. So perhaps next time you step inside an old pub, don't just order a drink. Take a moment to look around, because these places aren't simply somewhere to spend an evening. They're among Britain's greatest storytellers. And after everything we've witnessed today, if their walls really could talk, I wonder what story you'd ask them to tell.
Well, after all that grim history, I think a drink is deserved and the rising sun is calling. Now, unfortunately, this is a Sam Smith's pub. So anybody knows anything about Samuel Smith's pubs, there's no photography, there's no phones allowed. So I'm not going to be able to take you with me on this one. So you guys are welcome to go back in the time machine. The only thing is, after all this time, we might be running low on power a little bit. So to get yourselves back, all you need to do is press that like button and maybe power up in the comments. If everybody does that, you should be able to get back in one piece. As for me, I will be going inside, but I'm not sticking around for too long because I've heard there's some body snatchers lingering around here. So until I see you hopefully next week, stay safe, stay curious and make it back safely.